Well, everyone, the Google Pixel 6a is one of those phones that came out back in 2022. And when Google actually made this particular device, I was about to say Apple, when Google made this particular phone, I was actually very happy with the way they approached this particular device. Because the problem they were kind of giving us, I would say, with those other devices, with the Pixel 5a, particularly the 5a, the 4a was great. But the 5a was an interesting approach because it was just such a bigger phone, and I felt like they were just kind of making a really interesting choice of a device with the 5a. The 6a, on the other hand, I think was a much better choice. It's aged a lot better than the 5a, and I would arguably say that the Pixel 6a is still a very decent phone, and if you're wanting to pick it up, I would recommend it. I would probably say though, buying the Pixel 6 might be a better choice because they're not really that far off in the used market prices. So you might as well go and buy something like the Pixel 6, but I still think the Pixel 6a is still a very good device too if you already own it. It's not really that bad of a device. So if you want to pick it up or any other device, I'd recommend buying this year. Links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Google Pixel 6a, on the front of this particular phone, you are getting a 6.1-inch OLED display on the front of this thing. It's a 1080p panel, and it was honestly not that bad of a display. I still think it's a pretty good display. Like if you're just going to go ahead and use this phone as you normally would, it really isn't that bad, and there's definitely been way worse displays out there than this thing. It doesn't really get like super bright. It's not really a panel that's worth bragging about, but some highlights of it, I mean, it is a hole punch display, which is really nice. You're getting a little bit of like tiny bit of bezel on the top and the bottom, but it's not even that big of a deal. It's a flat display and it's like a decent display, but the viewing angles aren't really that great. It doesn't feel like a super premium phone, but in terms of the display, but it's really not that bad. And for the price of this thing at that time, I totally get it. And I still think it's like a pretty decent display when it comes down to it. So from that perspective, that kind of covers it up for the front side. On the sides of this phone though, fairly premium. It feels almost the same as the Pixel 6, I would say, on the side, which I think is another really cool thing going on here. So it doesn't necessarily feel like a super cheap phone by any means. It doesn't feel like a super, weird built phone, even though it's kind of supposed to be a budget device. I think Google did a pretty good job with this particular device, for at that particular time. On the bottom, you are getting a USB Type-C port, which is great. I love having USB-C. And on the back side of this particular phone, you are getting a couple things. So for one, you are getting that camera setup, which is a dual camera setup, which is actually really nice to have on this particular phone. You're also getting this plastic back. Now, the funniest thing is that for the longest time, I thought this was actually a glass back. I don't know what Google did here, but this phone actually has one of the most like glass feeling plastic backs I've ever had. That was something that was very shocking to me. And that in and of itself was something that when I look back, was a very crazy thing. I was not expecting that phone to feel like that, and it did, which kind of threw me off even more. So with that particular device in and of itself, it was a pretty crazy thing. I think looking back, it was pretty wild. But again, it's just one of those things that when I look back, it's just kind of funny. Now I can definitely tell it feels like a plastic back, but at that time, it was actually a little hard for me to tell, which is actually pretty crazy. So I would definitely say on the outside, definitely feels like a pretty good phone. There's not really a lot of stuff to hate on here on this particular device. A few things I could probably say is that one, there's no wireless charging on this phone or no reverse wireless charging either, which is a little weird because like the Pixel 6 Pro and the 7s and all those phones had wireless and reverse wireless charging, but they do have to cut corners somewhere. This phone is still giving you IP certification though, which is a kind of a nice thing to have, but no wireless charging can be kind of a turn off for some people. That kind of covers it up there from that perspective. Now from the camera side, like I mentioned, it is giving you a dual camera setup. So it's giving you a 12.2 megapixel wide angle lens, then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, and then an 8 megapixel wide angle camera on the front. So you can get 1080p video on the front, and you can do 4K at 60 on the back. And at that time, when I was messing around with this camera, even I still mess around with it sometimes, it's really not that bad of a camera. I do think for the most part, Google did a pretty good job with it. And if I'm going to go ahead and kind of mess around with this camera for the most part, I think it's a good lens. I think it's a good, decent lens for this type of camera. But definitely if you're trying to go through and actually maybe take amazing quality photos on this thing, you will have to kind of keep in mind in the back of your head that it may not be like the best camera of all time, but it's still going to be pretty decent. And I do think for the most part, it's not that bad of a camera. It's not that bad of a lens. You have to remember, Google does a really good job with their hardware sometimes, but they also do a decent job with the camera software. And although they don't like change the camera hardware like every single year by crazy amounts, they do spend a lot of time on their software side to making sure there's lots of improvements and stuff with the camera. And I do think this is one key area where they were probably trying to spend a lot of time and trying to fixing. So I totally get it. I think that's a really cool thing going on for this particular device. And looking back, I think that's a really good asset for this particular phone too. So that in and of itself by far is probably one of my most favorite things going on for this particular phone. It's not the best camera of all time, but it really isn't even that bad. And I do think that's a really cool thing going on for this particular phone as well. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the software side, this is again it's a really cool thing about this particular phone that you are getting basically still a phone that's not only still supported with software, but it's a really good phone that's still going to be supported with software for a good period of time. That is a really cool thing that I like about this particular device, because you can easily just go through and, have a phone that's going to be still supported with software for at least like another generation. And that is something I like a lot about these particular devices. Like if I'm going to go through and buy some sort of phone, I want it to still have some sort of updates with it. And you are still getting a phone that's going to be giving you updates within this particular device, which is something that I like a lot about this phone. So looking back, like I said before, if I'm going to go ahead and buy some sort of device, I like how this one is still giving me software updates and everything like that. And that is a very cool thing going on for this particular phone as well. So the performance is also another very good thing going on for this particular phone too. It is giving you that Google Tensor G1 chipset inside with 6GB of RAM. The thing you have to remember about the Google Pixel 6a is that this is a phone that is still going to be giving you pretty much the same type of performance as the Google Pixel 6. This is something that I love a lot about these particular devices, because that basically means that you're going to go through and buy this particular Pixel at a cheaper rate than the Pixel, than the Pixel 6 or the 6 Pro, presumably, but it's still going to be giving you a very, very good time on this particular device, which is something I love a lot about this particular phone. So looking back from the performance side, really everything you're going to be doing on this particular phone is probably going to be good. I think maybe the only thing you might be like kind of missing out on, or like feeling like you're not getting the best time, is probably when it comes down to things like, I'm trying to think, maybe like with the lack of 90Hz or 120Hz display. Sometimes having those types of displays makes the device feel and perform a lot better. So that might be like one thing that kind of keep you in mind in the back of your head. But I would still tell you beyond that, for almost every game you're going to play, for everything you're going to do on your particular device, you're probably going to feel like you have a really, really good time. And this one is no exception. You're definitely going to feel like you have a really good phone within this particular one for its price. Battery life I also think is pretty good for the most part as well. I compare this thing a lot and I still feel like the battery life is not really that bad on this particular phone, all things considered. So to kind of sum up this entire video, what I'll definitely tell you is that I definitely do think a phone like the Google Pixel 6a is still worth buying, and I still think it has some capability for the most part for you to go ahead and kind of like pick up. But I would still probably argue that if I were to go ahead and kind of recommend a phone to people, you're probably better off buying something like the Google Pixel 6 or Pixel 7. Those phones are really that much more expensive than this one in the used market, and that one honestly might make more sense probably for the vast majority of people to buy rather than this thing. So if I were to go ahead and recommend a phone to people, it probably would be something like the Google Pixel 7 or the 6, but I think this one's a great device too, and you can't really go wrong with it. So that kind of covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.